What is up, y'all? Kevin Kuhn here from Athlete Factors. This is the Athlete Factors podcast. This is my first ever episode with two guests, so I'm excited to do that. So my guests today are Dillon Harris and return guests Stephen Machek. How y'all doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, I can't say anything else for myself. About as good as I can be.
Excellent. So the reason I'm having both of y'all on is because you guys were the authors of a very interesting paper discussing a supplement ingredient that I've been interested in for quite a while, Theacrine. So let's kind of jump into what it is and where it comes from, and we'll just roll from there. Who wants to start?
I'll start us off. So, Theacrine, basically it's just a compound that resembles caffeine. The major difference is that it has a methyl group in the carbon 9, along with an extra ketone group. Pretty much where it comes from is, well, it's a naturally purulent alkaloid. It shares the same greenness as green tea, and actually comes from very similarly. It comes actually from a fruit called Theobroma grandiflorum, which resembles the cacao. Sorry, I can't remember how to.
You can cut that out.
That's the A.
I won't.
You won't? That's A. That's fine. That sounds more like me anyway. I just stumble on my words. It resembles them. It's like the tropical rainforest. It's actually closely related to that. Theacrine's actually very popular. I'd say popular. It's a main ingredient in certain green teas from the China region, like kombucha, I believe, is what it is. The main point behind Theacrine was like it has several medicinal uses. Like it's just good for antibodies, kind of like coffee, which has like a lot of like antioxidants. So Theacrine has some of those properties. What else is there? Just it's thought to have like the same effects as caffeine, but it's just a very under-researched supplement right now. Pretty much, the main selling point is, I don't know if y'all seen it, but like Theacrine is actually the synthetic version of it. So you can't actually buy Theacrine as like a raw powder. You actually have to, it's converted to Theacrine. The main selling point of it was like it's a non-habituating, kind of does the exact same thing as caffeine, but as research is showing us, it's not exactly doing that. And it's still kind of like iffy about what it exactly does in terms of performance.
Gotcha. So my first exposure to it was working as a supplement. I was vice president of research and development for a supplement company, and Compound Solutions, who makes Theacrine, one of their reps stopped by, and they were just showing me basically some of their preliminary data, just looking at the time it takes for caffeine to spike in your bloodstream, and the length of time that it's basically its half-life, and then comparing that to this new novel ingredient, Theacrine, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. So my first thought was like, okay, this is going to be amazing for like two athletes. And like, I don't know if you can consider one of them an athlete, but endurance athletes who are doing long event stuff, like longer than a marathon. So like ultra marathon, half Ironman, things like that, where you're going to be, competing for hour after hour after hour after hour. Like maybe this would be super beneficial. And then the other thing I thought of is like back mountain hunters. Like I was like, we could come up with a line specifically for people who are like backpacking all day and like hauling tons and tons of stuff. Like I thought this would be perfect. We ended up not doing anything with it, but I've always been interested in it because I was just like, man, I think there's something there. So
expecting the latter of those two examples,
right?
It's an untapped demographic you've got right there. People are way too into e-gaming. They need to be targeting the backpack hunters.
Yeah, man. For sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that too. I also think of like military too.
For
I don't
sure.
know why. Yeah, just you mentioned like long, like the hikes. They do their rucks and whatnot, carrying I think it's like 50 pounds. I don't actually remember, but like there's those heavy rucks and like doing long hikes too. So that was my first thought.
Backpack hunters.
Yeah, man. Dude, you get an elk and you're like 3 miles from camp. Like, oof, you're gonna want some.
Eat it on the run.
Exactly. You're gonna want some long-term stimulation.
That's right.
So
yeah,
awesome.
So one thing I wanted to add real quick is one of the novel things about Theacrine is the fact that it is so kind of engrossed in the nootropics area. And nootropics is a really hot topic nowadays. Our the previous podcast we did, we were talking about psychedelics, but nootropics can range anywhere from illicit use of things like Adderall to more kind of herbal compounds, things like alpha GPC, things like Theacrine. And I think one of the areas where Theacrine kind of shines is that mechanistically, it's very similar, as Dillon said, to caffeine. And that's kind of its main selling point, is that caffeine is kind of tried, tested, and true, right? So caffeine is very well established in the literature. And Theacrine shines in that it acts similarly, kind of different from all the other nootropics that are out there, which are kind of working by other mechanisms that are complementing a lot of these neurotransmitters, etc. So I think that Theacrine is particularly valuable, especially when we're talking about nootropics and kind of complementing caffeine, because of that role that it has as a very similar compound with very similar potential mechanisms.
Gotcha. So it comes basically from green tea.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So like if I just go to the store and I buy some green tea, like I'm ingesting some tea.
Yeah. That's something I didn't really look too much into, but yeah, it has some. I don't know the exact like milligrams or anything like that, but it usually contains at least some Theacrine in it, like naturally occurring the Theacrine. It will be labeled as Theacrine, not like Theacrine. I know like a lot of stores that sell like, especially like I don't want to say healthier stores, but like kombucha where it's marketed, that will have like some Theacrine in it as well, because that's where the main that's like that fermented. I got a telemarketer call. That's awkward. That's great timing. Getting a telemarketer call right, and as soon as it started, we love that. But yeah, so like kombucha, the fermented teas and whatnot, that has Theacrine in it as well. So it's not just regular green tea, but like kombucha, because it's when it's made from that the Theoroma grandiforum, it's also found in another flower that is used for kombucha. I just don't remember what it's called, and I'm not going to butcher pronunciation again.
Gotcha.
It's probably very similar to, without looking at the actual gram amounts per amount of other, source material. It's probably very similar to caffeine in the sense that, you can get caffeine from dark chocolate and other chocolate compounds. But how practical is it to get your caffeine from chocolate, right?
Right.
You don't really see a bunch of people taking like caffeine leaves either and just kind of like chewing on those. Or, as another example that's a little less related, you can get, creatine from red meat, but it's relatively impractical, which is probably heresy to say in Texas. But, you need to be eating at least a kilo of red meat per day to get even close to the amount of creatine that you would need to saturate skeletal muscle. So, when you're talking about sources, like those sources are important, but it's probably, without looking at the source material, it's probably difficult to get enough Theacrine from consuming foods that naturally have it.
Gotcha. So in order to determine like whether it's, well, before we go there, let's talk about the name of your paper here. So I've got it right here for those of y'all interested. And this is open access, so everyone can just Google it and take a look. But I'll include a link. So Theacrine is a potential caffeine alternative for enhanced ergogenic and cognitive performance in athletes, a call to action and a brief review. So in order to determine if it's a potential alternative for caffeine, it's going to be really helpful for people to understand, like, what is the role of caffeine for athletic performance? What are the pros? What are the cons? And so from there, we'll have a little bit more of a framework to understand the potential role of theacrine or Theacrine. So can we talk a little bit about caffeine's role in athletics?
Absolutely, yeah. So caffeine, as we know, is like in any pre-workout or just, I wanted to say basically any gym goer that goes to, caffeine is like the number one supplement being taken. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people, especially with like TikTok being very popular right now, we see people like shotgunning energy drinks, mixed with pre-workout and washing it down with another energy drink. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I had my energy drink here too. I mean, like, caffeine.
This is why we need Theacrine.
Caffeine, yeah, caffeine is everywhere. It's not even in just like performance aspects. Caffeine is everywhere.
Starbucks.
And people, yeah, Starbucks too, and no one realizes just how much they're consuming unless you're being a little bit of like, you're real health conscious about what you're doing. But even then, sometimes people will like let that go. So as we know, caffeine, typically in literature, usually about 200 to 400 milligrams a day is usually what like is best for performance. It is used for overall like muscular endurance, strength, and power. I know at like I've done a couple powerlifting meets, and like the number one go-to thing to help with performance, especially with like heavy maximal attempts, is caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching people fill Gatorade bottles full of like, obviously Gatorade, but like pre-workout as well, like 2-3 scoops. Like habituation's a really big deal when it comes to caffeine. And I think that's where later on, like Theacrine will shine just a little bit more. Also with like caffeine's ergogenic effects as well. So a con is the habituation, just how much people are consuming and just the overall, like, it's everywhere, and the way it's marketed too. Like, no one ever really talks about like I mean, they do, but in terms of performance, no one talks about how bad caffeine can be, and then how people are so like gung ho about buying pre-workout and needing that before their workouts to even get one. So the pros about it, it helps with like mental fatigue and whatnot. And so that way, when you're feeling good and you feel like you're not tired, you're able to squeeze out a few more reps or push an extra mile or two more than what you have been able to beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, and just like, I mean, like, it just helps like increasing reaction time too. So like, one paper that I cited was from Marissa Bello that compared caffeine and Theacrine in soccer. And so one of the things they looked at was like, they had increased reaction time. So caffeine helped with that. Theacrine did not. They didn't see anything with that. But caffeine was able to help with increased reaction time, decision making. So they're able to make smarter, maybe better plays because of that. So that's what kind of caffeine is like able to do.
Gotcha. So when we talk about the cons, like when we're talking about habituation, for those who may not really understand, like what does habituation mean? Like, what are we talking about here when especially when it comes to higher doses like that you'll find? Like, we're not talking about somebody who has a cup of coffee every day. Like, we're talking about people who have like maybe 4 to 6 cups of coffee a day, or who have an energy drink and pre-workout and coffee every day. Like what does that look like? What does that do as time goes on?
So I want to jump into the deep end just already. It can actually be, there's been a few cases of it being fatal. Because the more people are the more you use caffeine, the more, obviously, the more used to it you get and the more you need for it to respond.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a couple of studies out there that people had done the similar things what people are doing now, like chugging pre-workout, Red Bull, Monster, a Bang, a Reign, whatever it be, and it's been very fatal. It sent other people to the hospital. So, I mean, when it comes to like habituation and whatnot, I mean, it can, having large amounts of caffeine is like, you can feel anxious, anxiety, insomnia, not being able to sleep, which is could be deleterious towards, first of all, your health, but two, like if you're trying to, or like if you're a professional athlete or you're competing the next day and you're hyped up on caffeine all the time, it could impact you negatively. So just like that, I mean, and you don't realize, and then like when you go through like the withdrawal symptoms of like not having any caffeine, you get that headache. Some people are like, they need it. That's their first thing to do when they wake up. They immediately have to have one. And if they don't, they're cranky. They can't function, and just stuff like that. And it could, a lot of people end up relying on it a lot more than they do. I'm going to use my mom as a great example. She used to have a Route 44 Coke, which doesn't have that much caffeine in it. Like a regular Coke does not have that much caffeine in it. But when you ingest so much of it over time, like you need it. Like, I mean, it becomes like a life support almost.
Yeah, teachers do that a lot too. At least teachers over here, they'll go to Sonic and they'll get one of those. I don't know how many ounces. It's an absurd amount of ounces of soda, and they'll just sip on that throughout the day, and that's giving them carbohydrate, but it's also giving them a certain amount of caffeine. And in addition to what Dillon was saying, I kind of wanted to touch on habituation and kind of the mechanisms of what's happening, if that's something that we're interested in. And typically, the reason that caffeine is efficacious, and then also potentially Theacrine, what it's doing, is through adenosine receptor antagonism. And to not make that extremely complicated, we think about adenosine in physiology, and specifically with regards to exercise physiology. We think about the energy currency of the cell, adenosine triphosphate or ATP. And through metabolism of ATP, we have adenosine triphosphate, diphosphate, monophosphate as we continue energy metabolism and that requirement for energy. Eventually, we get to the point where we have basically just adenosine. And that adenosine, when it binds to adenosine receptors in the brain, that can cause us to feel tired, which kind of makes sense. If ATP is energy and we're burning through energy, eventually we're going to get to the point where all we have is kind of that base material that's going to accumulate and cause fatigue. So what caffeine is doing is it's antagonizing or blocking that receptor, preventing adenosine from binding, and therefore you're not necessarily making yourself energized, which is what a lot of people assume caffeine does. And there are some effects where caffeine can do that because it is a central nervous system stimulant. It has some effects on blood pressure, heart rate, things of that nature. But mainly what it's doing is it's increasing reaction time, alertness, all these different things through that adenosine receptor antagonism by blunting the perception of fatigue. And that's potentially how Theacrine is also working. And a lot of those things are still being kind of elucidated or figured out in comparison to caffeine. And with habituation, that's pretty much what's happening is negative feedback. If we're blocking those adenosine receptors all the time, our body needs that adenosine to bind in order to feel those feelings of fatigue and then regulate our body properly to, lay down, get sleep, get rest, flush that adenosine out, all that stuff. So we're going to upregulate those adenosine receptors. And so where part of this addiction portion comes in is that now we have an inordinate amount of adenosine receptors based on that upregulation of constantly blocking them. And then if we don't consume caffeine, that feeling of fatigue is basically exacerbated or magnified because we have all these adenosine receptors, we have all this adenosine binding. So we need that caffeine to kind of make ourselves feel normal at a certain point. So that was pretty much a down and dirty of how that addiction happens. And it's something that I think is really important for people to understand how caffeine is working, especially if they're trying to optimize on caffeine or other compounds that are working very similarly, because understanding how the receptors, the different mechanisms of caffeine are functioning allows you to kind of manage the amount that you're taking in, especially given the recommendations. And Dillon did a really good job of mentioning the kind of use in strength sports and general gym goers. But caffeine actually has a really, really extensive history in endurance athletes as well, especially because there's I would say there's a ton more. There's actually a kind of a growing amount of literature that's supporting it for strength and conditioning and resistance training in general. But a lot of it, just like with a lot of other research, leading up into like the early 2000s, etc., was all based in endurance, all based in aerobic types of endeavors. And basically what, caffeine has been substantiated, or things that antagonize the adenosine receptor, they can help with things other than fatigue, kind of attenuation, things like substrate availability. So helping to improve
increased fat usage and
and one of the ways it's doing that, not to get too deep into the details, is it's a phosphodiesterase inhibitor. So it'll prevent the negative feedback of the cyclic AMP second messenger pathway from basically shutting itself off, for lack of a better term. So it kind of keeps that going, keeps energy substrate available, things like increased calcium availability, things of that nature too. So that was just a little addition or addendum to everything that Dillon had already said that was very accurate. So
awesome. So one of the things that Willoughby talked to us in grad school about was because he was a big fan of showing up to class with a big styrofoam cup that had a red line RTD, right, which is 2 servings.
Yeah. With beta out for some reason.
Why not? It already tastes bad. You might as well throw some other not great tasting stuff in there. And then
in a room, sorry to interrupt. You ever sat there and just had like a performance enhancing dose of beta alanine? It's horrible.
The paresthesis and tinglies and all that. No, thank goodness. No.
Sitting in a chair trying to lecture or listen to a lecture, there's no way.
It's got to be awful.
Apparently not to him.
He can handle it. So on top of the 2 servings of Redline, or Meltdown, whichever he was feeling that day, he'd usually pour an entire Monster on top of that, and that's what he'd be sipping on. And so he would tell us, like, hey, your receptors, they're gonna get fried doing this. So I don't think this is the episode to discuss it, but he would talk about ways for us to reset our receptors and feel like a quote unquote thermogenic virgin, which is always great. So he taught us some tricks of the trade, which is fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and we could be on, like, I was taking Redline Black on Blue Ultra Hardcore, like the capsules. I would take 1 or 2 of those every morning because I was up at 4:30, and I'd be working basically all day until 9 or 10 at night. And you got to get in a solid workout, so that's a great way to do it. But yeah, you get to Thursday or Friday and you're like, it's not cutting it anymore. Maybe I should take 3. Well, that's probably not a good idea. So he was like, here's what you do. Starting on the weekend, you do this, this, and this, and then come Monday morning, you take 1 or 2, and you're like, woo!
You want to share what this and this is?
We'll talk about it once we finish recording. I'm not trying to get held responsible for anything.
Sounds very proprietary in nature, so we never had this discussion. Apparently, he holds back out on us.
It's surprisingly simple. So it's not dangerous at all, but it's we'll talk about it after. So
I tried to do it the dirty way, which is just complete abstinence for a while, and then I ended up pulling my back a week out from a powerlifting meet, and so I decided to never go off of caffeine.
It's too dangerous. Once you're on it, you got to stay on it.
Yeah, that's right. It's the withdrawals aren't the only thing. You just become a useless lump of flesh, actually.
Nice. Yeah, that's what's tough for athletes is so me personally, I don't consume a lot of caffeine, and I do that deliberately so that when I do have a a really difficult workout planned or competition, like that's when I'm trying to use caffeine. Like I want to get as much benefit from it as possible. And if I'm consuming it every day, then I know I either have to go with a really high dose, or I just have to be okay with, you know what, this is going to bring me to my normal level, and then I'll just, I'll race or whatever.
That's pretty much where I'm at right now. Is I generally need about 300 milligrams in the morning to be my normal self. If I don't have my caffeine, that's probably, I'm essentially not someone you should talk to, not because I'm upset, but I don't think I'm mentally there. It's literally an out of body experience. It's horrible.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and then when I need a little extra, that's when you top it off with an extra 160 or 300. Hopefully not 300. But I try really hard. I have, in Willoughby's lab, I would probably say that all of us are caffeine addicted, which is, it's just the name of the game, especially in strength sports. The prevalence. There have been some papers published on the prevalence of caffeine usage in strength sports, resistance training in general. But I think what's really important is to make sure that, if you are addicted to caffeine, and depending on how fast you metabolize caffeine, there's a lot of research nowadays, and the CYP A12, I think it's A12. I can't remember the specific conformation for that gene that metabolizes caffeine, but they're finding out now that, you either have a shorter caffeine metabolism or a longer caffeine metabolism, and the ones that have a longer metabolism, it might be related to cardiovascular disease incidence. But basically, that's the difference between 4 hours, 6 hours, maybe a little bit longer, things of that nature. And so what I just try to do is, I know if I'm trying to go to sleep by 10, I know caffeine has about a 6-hour half-life. So I'm trying to cut off all my caffeine intake by about 3 p.m. That's pretty much, what I try to do to mitigate consuming too much, because that's what I do when I'm stressed, is I overconsume either stimulants or, like other supplements in order to try to get myself to a certain mental state, for lack of a better term.
Sure. So let's talk about some of the specific ways that that theacrine and caffeine are both similar in some ways that they differ specifically.
So I think one of the major ways that they differ is their half-life. I think that's a really big thing, because caffeine is, as Steven said, known to have around a 6-hour half-life, while theacrine can be anywhere from, I believe it's anywhere from almost 10 to 20 hours. It's a really long half-life. And that could potentially be dangerous too, as well, because while we know that you can ingest more theacrine at safer levels, you can have a lot more, because it's just, I actually don't really know why you can ingest more. I never really looked into that. Unfortunately, that's probably something I should have, but you can actually have more theacrine, and they found it to not be as toxic as caffeine at the same dosage. So similarly, just their mechanisms of action, just how they go into the body, they're both rapidly absorbed in the stomach lining, and they usually reach about 30 minutes or so. They're both almost 90% completely absorbed. They both cross the blood-brain barrier very easily. So, you're feeling the effects almost, I don't want to say instantaneously, but as soon as you take that first sip, I know that I feel much better after, as soon as I start having it. It may not even have made it into my system at all, but that, knowing I have that first sip too, just really helps.
I've before. I've literally held a can, and my mood automatically
it goes up.
It's that's a feed forward effect, right? It's the same thing when you see really good food and you start salivating. I hold a can of caffeine, I get happy. That's how it works.
Yeah.
Really quick, continue, Dillon. I just wanted to say that I don't think that if Dillon doesn't have a specific answer for a mechanism or whatnot, that it's because he didn't do research. I think that it's also because that there's just not a whole lot of research on theacrine. So some of these things, we have a general idea why we're studying it, because it's similar to caffeine, because it can kind of complement things, because we know that in some scenarios, especially a lot of like animal research, we can start to substantiate some of these benefits. But I mean, it just doesn't have the body of literature, surprisingly so, as compared to even a magnitude of caffeine, a fraction of caffeine. And that was something that we kind of discovered when we were writing the paper, is that we thought that, oh wow, there's all this data on Theacrine, we'll be able to write a good review paper, because I've never seen a review paper on Theacrine before. And when Dillon had this idea, I was like, yeah, that's fantastic. And then he goes in there and he looks through all the literature, and we're reading through the review, and I'm like, so where's the evidence on Theacrine with this, or the mechanism of Theacrine on that? Like, how does it affect substrate availability and things like that in comparison to caffeine? And you can't find anything, I mean, maybe we're missing out on some of the literature that's in there, so there are Theacrine experts that are listening in, and they want to substantiate some of that and provide us some of the literature. I'm more than happy to see that, but it's not readily available. A lot of this stuff is very difficult to find, and that's kind of why we tried to pivot the nature of the review as also a call to action, because there really isn't as much as there needs to be, especially when it comes to sport performance.
Gotcha. So, speaking of sport performance, if we don't have a whole lot of specific data to make some not necessarily claims, but some specific claims, let's say, about it, what do y'all theorize with regards to, like, what populations would get the most benefit from it, what sports would get the most benefit from it? What do y'all think as far as that goes?
So one of the major questions that kind of needs to be answered first, in my opinion, is, so we know how much caffeine to take for actual, like, unless it's the best response, can give you like the best performance outcomes. We don't know that for Theacrine. We don't know it. Surprisingly, no one's looked into it, or maybe they have. It just is, again, it could be hidden. But from my research, there wasn't anything I found. So we don't know how much Theacrine. We know how much is toxic, but we don't know how much can give you the same, like, performance outcomes as caffeine. So
there definitely aren't position papers out there recommending a range of doses for human populations, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, so in terms of, like, what I think a lot of sports could get use out of it, but I think the major ones are, like, we kind of talked about this before the podcast even started, but, like, again, or maybe it was during, I don't actually remember. That says something.
Not enough caffeine.
That says it's not enough caffeine, exactly. Maybe I need some Theacrine to, like,
you need some Theacrine. Definitely.
Maybe. But the longer, the sports that take a long time, basically. So I know hiking, I don't know if you'd claim that as a sport, but it's definitely an exercise that takes a very long time. They're hiking for a long time. I lost the word. This is just how I normally am. That's fine.
Just so not to offend the hikers.
How do you win at hiking? Like, do you hike the best? Like, I mean,
you beat the mountain, dude. You beat the mountain. You got to the top. You go back down. You're like, I dominated you.
Because otherwise, if you put a timer on it, now it's just a race. Now it's not hiking anymore. Now you're just running.
Well, I mean, like, exactly. Yeah, you're running with a backpack.
Yeah,
heavy backpack. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But, like, just areas like that, like hiking, rock climbing, that would be useful, especially when they're climbing up. Because I know there's the sports version. There's bouldering, speed climbing, and I don't remember the last one.
I didn't even know there was that much.
There's three. There's three classifications. There's, again, the bouldering, which is like basically you use no rope, no safety thing, and you have to climb up it. Speed
That's
climbing
called suicide.
Well. Yeah. I mean, except it's usually done indoors on an artificial rock wall. It's not usually out, but there is people that pre-rock climb with no safety equipment, other like no ropes or anything. They just have some tools on them, and that's it. But stuff like that, I mean,
What's interesting about that is I know that there's some rock climbers, especially if they're doing like without a rope, they don't want their heart rate to go up at all. They want to be as chill as possible. So having any sort of like nervous system stimulation, like when they feel their heart rate increasing or like surge of adrenaline, they're like, "Oh no, this is bad. This means I'm probably about to die." So I don't know. I mean, but everybody's different. So there might be some who are like, "Yeah, hook me up." But I think
that's really crazy. That actually makes a lot of sense from the perspective of I probably don't want to be kind of fidgety and nervous when I'm trying to make sure that I'm holding on to a rock for dear life. And then I'm trying to imagine myself in that same position. And I think maybe about 10 feet off the ground, I would probably be getting that response. I have utmost respect for those types of people. I joked about it before, but I'm afraid of heights. Like, I hate Tower of Terror at Disneyland because I hate the heights. So the idea of climbing up something and, maybe one wrong placement of my hand could lead to my imminent death. It blows my mind. I would hope that I would die really fast. That's all I can.
Well, from a 10-foot drop, you're probably going to be okay.
You overestimate the integrity of my entire physiological structure.
Your VO2 is too high.
That's right. I weigh like 120 pounds, so I basically float.
You're like a bird.
Exactly.
At least hollow bones. He wouldn't reach terminal velocity in 10 feet anyway.
No, definitely not. Yeah, that's why it would be a slow death, is because I would literally float to my doom.
But
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so like just sports, where you're gonna be doing some kind of like performance endeavor for like a long sustained period of time. Running is a great example. I could see it having a few uses in the military. There was one paper on it that talked about Theacrine in the military and like comparing it to like the caffeine, just the caffeine use that people were using. And they found that almost every single one of them was using caffeine to help them get through their days, because they're having 10, 15-mile rucks and then just needing something to help give them that extra edge. And that's where I think Theacrine does shine in, because of it's a lot safer of a compound to be ingesting at higher doses too, over a long period of time. Plus, it also gives you a lot of like health benefits, like antioxidant properties. That's the word I was looking for, and just cognitive. Like, it has neuroprotective abilities as well. Once I looked at it, that I talked about was the Parkinson's. It can help actually prevent against Parkinson's disease by what's the word? I can't remember. Is it SIRT3 deactylation? Pretty sure.
Yeah, sirtuin 3 deacetylation.
Yeah, I'm not gonna butcher another word. That's the thing. I'm not gonna butcher another word. I'll butcher several things, but I'll try to save face as much as
Improved bioenergetics. How about
there
that?
You go.
There you go.
That sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Simplify.
Yeah, there you go.
So probably going to be more beneficial for, just because the half-life is so much longer, it's probably going to be more specific or beneficial for longer duration activity, whether it's and because of that, it's probably going to be like lower intensity, longer duration, perhaps. Yeah. Although we don't know, right?
Yep.
Exactly.
So, we don't know.
So that leads me to my next question, which is, what else don't we know that would be really, really helpful? So, for example, do we know that it has like the same diuretic effect as caffeine?
I don't remember anything about that. Dillon, have you seen anything that would demonstrate that? That's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
That definitely needs to be investigated, right? That's fantastic, because one of the reasons I consume my caffeine in the morning is because it helps keep my schedule regular.
Things rolling. Yeah.
Exactly. That and a
So-
peanut butter sandwich, and I'm good to go.
So I say I just thought of that, but I actually didn't just think of that, because when I was thinking about like, hey, we could make this into a supplement for hunters, I was like, because I know, like, I used to do it like a lot of hunting, and like, you wake up super early, before light, you go out, like here in Texas, you go out to your hunting blind, and you just sit there, and it's depending on what part of the season, like maybe it's a little chilly, so you're like bundled up a little bit, and you're just sitting in your stand, and you're like, oh, this is pretty comfortable, like right here, as long as I don't move. And then like you start to like close your eyes a little bit, and then boom, like you're nodding off. Okay, so tons of people, to prevent that, they're drinking their coffee first thing in the morning, but then like 30 minutes into sitting in your blind, you're like, oh man, I got to go to the bathroom. So I was like, I could save so many people's hunting experience, make it a little bit more beneficial. Like, now you're maybe not going to miss out on that deer, because you didn't have to.
I think what we need to do is, I think you've already developed the pitch. I think we need to just make the company. And as Dillon and I are both students, I think that, Kevin, you should take the liberty to put in all of the licensing and whatnot for that. And
sounds like a lot of work.
The research board. We'll definitely split it 3
You're
even
my
ways.
scientific advisory board.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah.
That sounds great. And we'll each take 33.3%. I think that makes sense.
Sounds good.
You'll get the logo imprinted on like rifles, on bows. It's great.
Everything. We'll get some
Everyone's
camo.
going to be working with the Kevin Coon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I after my 4 to 5 year stint in the supplement industry, I was like, I'm never doing this again. So if anybody else wants to run with the idea, hey, you could, cite your sources, aka us, and you could throw us a few bones if you want. But like, hey, take it, run with it, enjoy it.
At the very least, we have the intellectual property of that study. So if anyone ever decides that they want to do that study on the diuretic effects of Theacrine, we have to be involved. So
that was all me.
That was all Kevin. That's right. That's right. It was all his idea. Bill and I, we don't need to be involved, but hopefully, you'll call us so we can get in on the action too.
Exactly. Well, you could be the be the investigators.
That's right.
Y'all could conduct the study. So you're welcome in advance.
Yeah, I didn't say thank you yet, but you are welcome. Yes, I am.
I'm talking about the people who are going to make this product.
Yeah, they're just banking off of your intellectual property.
So, what else don't we know that would be very beneficial to know?
I'll start off real quick. I mean, some of that stuff regarding substrate availability, some of the mechanisms behind how it's working. We definitely don't know a lot of that. How does Theacrine differentially affect fat oxidation, carbohydrate metabolism? Does it have some of the similar effects when it comes to calcium handling? A big issue with a lot of the strength performance, and then individuals that are interested in gaining strength and muscle when it comes to creatine supplementation. There's this whole idea of the counteracting roles of caffeine and creatine. Specifically, I'm not well versed in that area, but a lot of it has to do with relaxation, excitation, a lot kind of revolving around calcium handling. So how is Theacrine affecting that? Because if we can actually optimize some of the effects of creatine by using Theacrine instead of caffeine, or at least supplementing our caffeine with Theacrine instead of purely using caffeine, can we get some more benefits out of some other supplements too? And then, as we kind of already talked about, we don't really know a whole lot in athletic endeavors, so we don't know nearly as much about anything revolving exercise, including endurance exercise, including strength, which, given the body of literature with caffeine, we're only starting to kind of touch on the benefits of caffeine for strength and conditioning. So just kind of, I think we understand that the mechanisms are there. There's a few kind of more preliminary trials that demonstrate that there is some evidence that Theacrine is beneficial. Is it as beneficial as caffeine at the moment? Definitely not. With even the given literature, I would probably say that it's not something that we can just substitute 1-to-1. But I think that with more research, there's definitely some rationale to substantiate that we can, in the future, with more evidence, at least supplement caffeine or other stimulant-based products with Theacrine in order to kind of actualize some of the benefits of caffeine without just utilizing more. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Dillon, was there anything else in terms of what we don't know that I missed?
I mean, the only thing other is what we've already talked about before, just how high of a dose is the best, or how low of a dose is the best for performance. That's the only thing I can really think of that. We've already talked about that. I mean, what was it? And then all the literature that is here, the studies that have looked at it, they've all been very conflicting. They see different things. Some say it does help as a nootropic with parameters on like mood and stuff like that, like it helps mood. And then some people say they don't see anything. So I mean, it's just a lot of just stuff that just is conflicting. So just going more into like, does it help with more like mood, like modifying your mood? Because I know, again, like with caffeine, some of it is like it helps your mood, you feel better and whatnot. We don't exactly know that with Theacrine. We don't know if it's just mechanistically, is it helping with your mood with like the adenosine antagonism, or is it just because you feel happier having it? Is it just something we've told ourselves, convinced ourselves? So that's something we really don't know either.
Dillon makes a good point when it comes to the dosages and how kind of spread out all of the data is. I think that we don't know what the appropriate dose is because of how spread out the different demographics are, right? It's not like all of the data is focused around endurance athletes and different investigators are going, well, 100 didn't work, how about 200? How about 300? How about 100? We have some data that is null, so we have some null findings, some negative, not negative findings, but equivocal findings. And then it seems like people just kind of move on, or the data is currently still being collected. So I think that over time, once we get a good idea of what doses are effective, then we'll be able to make more definitive statements on a given population or a given purpose for these different applications of Theacrine.
Cool. Perfect. So based off what we do know, essentially what's best? Caffeine by itself, Theacrine by itself, or some sort of combination?
So as everything stands right now, Stephen did say this already, but caffeine is definitely on top in terms of like a stimulant for just any kind of like athletic endeavor. It's still the king of supplements for that. Now, it is interesting because it definitely does have a role with them together, but only one study that I found looked at that, about how a combination of Theacrine and caffeine, but both doses were relatively low. I believe both doses was barely 150 milligrams of each, and they didn't see anything. And that caffeine still, 300 milligrams of caffeine was still better. So, I mean, there definitely could be a future role with the caffeine and Theacrine together, but what is that role and what are the dosing? We don't know.
A lot of these studies too, a lot of the caffeine studies that are kind of coming out, they're trying to establish individuals that are habituated and not habituated. So I think that's also going to be really important in the future with Theacrine research, is can Theacrine actually help elicit some of these similar cognitive benefits in individuals that are already caffeine habituated? Because that's where we're kind of seeing the deleterious impacts, is people that are over consuming caffeine in very habituated states. They're already consuming a ton. They're just throwing more on to try to elicit some of those benefits. Obviously, there's some detriments to individuals that are caffeine naive, consuming tons of caffeine as well, just like with anyone that's unexperienced with the drug. But I think that where Theacrine is really going to shine, which is kind of what we highlight in our paper, is individuals that are definitely habituated. They're already kind of addicted potentially to caffeine, and how they'd be able to kind of supplement some of those, or attenuate, mitigate is probably the word I was looking for, mitigate some of those deleterious impacts of overuse of caffeine.
Gotcha. So you kind of just answered my next question, which is basically like, how do you think it will be utilized the most effectively going forward? So that's perfect. Thank you for reading my mind.
Of course, yeah. Not like we have a question list or anything like that either. So,
dude, I was expecting you to say something like, well, all the caffeine's kicking in, and now I'm just working on another level. But you know what? That's fine too.
I mean, when you say another level, it's just my normal, like, basal state of cognitive function.
So you can read minds when you're at your regular level. Before that,
I can use my own mind. How about that?
Awesome. So do you think with enough caffeine, one day we'll be able to read minds?
You'd die beforehand, but no.
Okay. All right.
Maybe that is what it takes to read minds.
Yeah.
It's like it's like one of those physiological, like, barrier supersessions where you're able to temporarily overcome your physical boundaries, but you die, you know? Is it worth it? Like, it could be.
Is it worth it? Do it for science, man.
Like, think about it. You're sitting in a room with a guy who has a bomb, you know, and there's like a passcode, and you're like, give me the passcode, man. He's like, no, of course not. And then you just have a crap ton of caffeine on hand. You slam it, you tackle him, you get the code. It's all there. You saved, at least another
countless
person.
Lives.
Yeah. Hopefully at least one other person. If it's just you in the room with them, probably not worth it.
I mean, like, you mentioned that, but, like, do you think he's really gonna let you slam down like 4 like 300 milligram energy drinks, or like however many it takes?
Dude, if I have a bomb, like, what are you gonna do?
What's your last wish?
If he pulls out if I had a bomb and the guy who's trying to disarm it pulled out a knife, I'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna stop you right now. But if he pulls out a bunch of energy drinks, like, what are you doing?
I mean, I guess, like, if you have like caffeine, like those little caffeine pills, you could just down the whole bottle like right then and there. And just...
Yeah,
that's right.
I think what it's going to take, and this is definitely not a recommendation, is it's going to take the perfect combination of caffeine, Theacrine, as well as DNP and ephedrine. I think that it's going to be a very specific combination of things that will literally, in doses that are too high, kill you. So
let's throw in some beta-alanine just to round it out, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what else is going to pull you into action rather than the paresthetic feeling of ants crawling all over your face?
Yeah, that just means your skin's more receptive, so you're able to make even quicker decisions because you're already tingling.
Yeah, that's right. It's like Spider-Man. Yeah, exactly. You might be able to stick to walls because of the sweat, too.
I hope everybody listening is like, all right, we need to study this. Like, let's get together. Let's make this happen.
I want to reiterate that I'm not recommending that people consume a bunch of stimulants altogether, especially ones that have been literally proven, like, if you overconsume them, that you might die. So that's the reason why ephedrine's banned, is because people are like, oh yeah, this works. If I just keep taking more of it, that'll be, that's more fat loss. That's not how it works, guys. That's not how ephedrine works. And that's why it's banned. People just ruin good things.
This is why we can't have nice things.
That's right. People
ruin it.
We're using lower doses of anabolic steroids. No one would have ever, figured out or caught on.
That's a very fair point.
But people just want to win, man. They just wanted it. They just want it too bad.
That's right. You get that mentality where you're like, hey, I'll do whatever it takes. If one is good, 10 must be better. I'm going all in.
That's right. That's 100% the way to think. Hopefully your listenership, it has a little bit more insight than to take things very literally, but I hope so.
So, for all those listeners, let's say they want to get their hands not on those other things that you were just discussing, not disgusting. They want to get their hands on some Theacrine. How do they do that?
I think the easiest way is you can just go to Amazon, type in Theacrine, and you can buy some there.
Yeah.
I haven't seen like the powder form or any other thing with that like in the store or anything like that. You may be able to go to like I know here in Waco we have a drug emporium that may have it, but I'm not entirely sure. But again, Amazon, bulksupplement.com, I know they sell like a bunch of like bulk supplements of whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Dillon ever talked about it, but the words sound very similar. Theacrine and Theacrine, they're basically the same thing. It's kind of like Creapure and creatine, right? So Theacrine, like the word T and then crine, is actually kind of a proprietary formulation, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like purification of the general Theacrine molecule. So just to make sure that we're differentiating there. And with regards to purity, you might want to go with something that's been a little bit more empirically studied, like Theacrine, which you'll see in a lot of the research has the little trademark or the little, what's it called? Little logo on it to make sure that you don't copyright logo. And there you go.
Copyright. Little C.
Yeah, a little C.
Yeah.
Blanking on what the C stood for a second. But yeah, you just want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence. If you're not getting something that's a more proprietary, more studied version of it, then you might want to go ahead and try to make sure that you're getting the purity tested. Not literally, but if you're going with a company that has the certificate of analysis to make sure that you're getting a high quality product. I know Bulk Supplements does that. So that's a recommendation there too. But yeah, you can go on Amazon. You can pretty much buy as much of it as you want. You might indirectly get some of it from some of these nootropic supplements that are going out on the market. One of the benefits to the industry is that Theacrine, I'm assuming, is more expensive than caffeine because you can buy probably about a lifetime worth of caffeine for probably $100, something of that nature. Not recommend buy caffeine powder because that's a very dangerous prospect. It doesn't taste very
volatile.
Good. Yeah, very, very volatile. You don't want to accidentally take a gram of caffeine when you meant to take a gram of creatine. And if you end up taking a similar effective dose, like 3 to 5 grams of caffeine, I mean, you might end up in the hospital.
In the hospital, yeah.
Yeah, so
you're gonna have a bad time.
You're definitely going to have a bad time. You might be in the fetal position in a corner for a while before the ambulance gets there. But definitely don't do that, and definitely don't experiment. Yeah, or superhuman, but definitely, Dillon said that. I didn't say that.
I don't recommend it either, though.
No,
I'm trying it.
And we're definitely not advocating for getting a bunch of Theacrine and like slamming it and trying to be your own case study, because we really don't know. There could be some deleterious impacts that we're not aware of yet, just because they haven't been studied in humans in higher doses.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a great point too, because everyone, like caffeine especially, I know everyone has a different tolerance to it as well. So with Theacrine, it's do not know, but it's probably the similar situation where everyone handles it a little bit differently. Some people may be able to consume more and have none of those like adverse side effects. Like, I know several people that can like slam down an energy drink and then go to bed, like 300 milligrams, and then go to bed. Now, are they actually getting good quality sleep? Probably not. But can they still go to sleep? Yes. And that's kind of similar with Theacrine. It's just you may be able to tolerate way more, but we don't know. So you probably shouldn't just go around just slamming a gram just because you think it's okay.
Yeah, that's where a lot of those mechanistic research studies are going to come in, is looking at maybe the receptor differences. So how strongly is Theacrine binding, antagonizing adenosine receptors in comparison to caffeine? How is Theacrine metabolized when it comes to, or is it using similar enzymes to break down Theacrine as it is with caffeine? A lot of these things are, in my mind, or Dillon can correct me if I'm wrong, we are unknown. We have no idea how these things are different in that regard. So I think that's where we're going to get a lot of information on how we can titrate doses up or down depending on the different things that we're using it with, whether caffeine or other nootropic or ergogenic supplements.
Awesome. Well, y'all, that kind of rounds out all my specific questions. So if somebody wants to reach out to y'all and either ask some questions or they want to just follow your work, what's the best way to do that?
Go, Dillon.
Okay, I don't know. I've never been asked this question before. I mean, they can always first podcast, first publication.
Yeah.
First time being asked.
Man.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's a lot of firsts for me. I mean, you can reach out to my Instagram. I mean, Dillon_Reese. Email me at my email with REIS.
Spell the whole thing.
DILLON_REIS. Or you can email me at DILLON_Harris1@baylor.edu.
Yes. So. I've given the spiel before, I think, but you can find me on Instagram. That's where I'm wasting most of my time. My Instagram is stretch, like the word stretch, the thing that I don't do as much of as I need to nowadays. _RX, like prescription. So stretch_RX. That's my Instagram. If you want to email me, that's Steven with a V _Machek, MACHEK, the number 2 at Baylor.edu. But if you want any of the research publications, both Dillon and I are on ResearchGate. That's a great way to obtain. The Theacrine review that we wrote is open access, so you can basically just take the link that Kevin puts up, and you can get it that way. But a lot of the research that we're going to be putting out in the future, you can attain a lot of that on ResearchGate. So if you just search one of our names in ResearchGate, you should be able to find that stuff pretty readily. And we do a lot of stuff related to supplements, a lot of stuff related to specifically resistance training, growth outcomes, anti-atrophy outcomes. It's a lot of people kind of just think about the growth, but you can impact the other end of the equation by looking at how things are, how we're impairing the breakdown processes as well. So a lot of things related to resistance training, nutrition, everything of the like, specifically related to supplements. That's what we're trying to do in our kind of. We don't have a definitive lab really, specifically because I'm leaving. Right, I'm leaving Baylor. I'm taking my
got a job.
Yeah, in Arkansas.
Yeah.
So that's me making my own lab, I suppose. And then Dillon is starting a master's program under Dr. Leslie Funderburk. So she does a lot of research in sports supplementation. She's published a lot of papers in the past few years on leucine, things of that nature. She's doing a lot with her current student on fish oil. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that is going to be put out by her lab, either by her students other than Dillon and Dillon himself, and then hopefully I'll be putting out some stuff in the near future that will be as interesting, maybe not, to read as a lot of stuff putting out.
No, it better be interesting so I can get you back on the podcast.
Yeah, well, if it's not, I can still turn it into a big joke and it'll still be entertaining.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I've had an excellent time and I've learned quite a bit, and I'm probably going to go get a little bit of caffeine right now. Might be some green tea, so I get a little bit of Theacrine in there as well. Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah.
But, yeah, thank you guys so much for doing this. And, yeah, any final thoughts?
You get you get your green tea. Not only are you getting the Theacrine, but you're also getting the theanine, which is a really cool other compound that helps kind of, I guess, buffer the stimulant jittery aspects of caffeine. So that's a cool thing too.
Perfect. Well, I will definitely go ahead with the green tea then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good plan.
Awesome.
Thanks for
All right,
having
y'all.
us on.
For sure.
Yeah, thank you for having
My
us.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for. Yeah, thank you.
For sure. My pleasure. Alrighty, y'all. Thanks for watching and listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode. Adios.